This is creative banter. We're talking in circles, evidently about nothing, and about everything, all at once this episode. With Ben having sent off his zine files to the printers, a conversation ensues around the zine as a lesser quality monograph, and other comparisons between those two mediums of photographic presentation. And as usual, I speak on about self-made torment as I continue debating various nonsensical aspects of my creative life. Oh, there's also some puppy talk in this episode, which is becoming a pretty regular segment since Emmie's arrival. Let's dive right into this, shall we?
Wait for that famous countdown. Oh, there it is. It's fast this week.
Yeah, a little bit. That's good.
Yeah.
It still doesn't matter.
It makes no difference. We're not launching rockets into space with this countdown, but
no.
I kind of feel like there's some importance to it.
It seems that way, but at the same time, I thought it was funny. I was taking Emmie out to go to the bathroom before this, and as I was going down, I told her, I'm like, all right, come on, so we can go down, go to the bathroom, and then you can play with Lucy and with my girlfriend and all that, and downstairs, like away from everything. And that way I can record and talk a bunch of nonsense for an hour.
Yes. Somehow it all makes sense, but just, it doesn't, but I guess it does.
Yeah. So I saw on your Instagram stories that you sent out your zine.
Yeah. I plugged in all the images because the last time we recorded, I hadn't written the text yet for the new images, and I may have had them plugged into the design, but I went through and I wrote the type. It's not a lot, maybe about 3 medium-sized paragraphs for each one. And then I felt pretty good about it, so I submitted it, and it's going through the process right now. And it got to the point where I go through and from start to finish, I read each page. I'll read it out loud. I'll kind of also read it to myself and just make sure everything's flowing fine. And it gets to the point where I'm going from these big choices in terms of is this paragraph saying what I want it to in a cohesive way, down to should it be "and" or should it be "in"? Should it be on or should it be "in"? Just stuff like that. And then at that point, I can't, I have a hard time making sense of it once you see it so much. But I got down to the point where I was satisfied enough with the type. I know it's not perfect. It'll be fine, but it's a zine as opposed to
a proper book. A
proper book, exactly.
Yeah.
That where there's more pressure on it, and I think it will turn out very well. I'm quite happy with how everything turned out, but there's certainly less pressure involved. And so it should be about 5 days or so for production. We got Thanksgiving coming up because we're recording this a week early. And so we'll see on that. But by this time next week, I might potentially have them on the way.
Nice.
And then I can start getting the print portfolios mailed out. So it's a process, but it's coming along. And so I'm certainly happy with that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it all turns out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well, seeing it in its final form and everything. Because like we've talked about before, zines are definitely something that there's at least passing interest in for me. But at the same time, there's that whole quality aspect of them. Like, you think of a zine and you just kind of think of them as a lower production value book. And it's like, I don't know, I struggle with that. I struggle with that idea of putting, like, especially, I could see it especially for like you, where you already have a book put together and then putting out a zine. It's kind of, I could see that maybe as feeling like a downgrade, even though it really shouldn't, but I don't know.
Yeah, to me, I see it as something that's rather liberating because there's a lot less pressure involved in the production of it. And so that in itself, I think makes it more enjoyable to create, because there's that feeling that goes along with, creating something, and especially something tangible, as we've talked about in the past, but without all the pressure that comes with it. And since this, assuming everything turns out pretty well and I'm happy with it, and it's something that can work into my annual production
offerings,
of things. Yeah, offerings, that's a better word. I see this as something that I can do on a yearly basis. And I was thinking, I was chatting with another photographer, and I was thinking about, if one is to do a full book, it would probably take, I just came up with maybe like 6 years, give or take, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, to come up with enough work that one is happy with to fill out a book and to give it some sort of a sense of direction, some sort of theme, as opposed to these are pictures I took in the past few years I'm happy with, but just some sort of story that goes with it. And if one was to do that, let's say every 6 years versus a person doing a zine every year, I think you would come out ahead financially doing the zines, and
not to
with
mention
less pressure.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that the zines as a whole, you don't need to print as many to get that cost down.
Exactly.
So, you may not be selling a zine for $50, $75, $100, but at the same time, it's not costing you $25, $50, $75 to make.
Yeah.
There's no, you don't have to go through the Kickstarter process necessarily with it, or try to get that funding in order to make it happen. And I don't think there are as many headaches around making a zine either. Right now we're supposed to have 2 monograph reviews in this upcoming Nature Vision magazine issue. Mm-hmm. And there are the 2 that we had planned out ended up having some kind of production issues. So both of those have gotten delayed for a couple weeks, which would set back our schedule. Yeah. So I was rushing around contacting other photographers and was like, hey, let's get your book in sooner than later. But all that struggle, all of that production, the woes that you go through have got to be such a pain.
Yeah. Because in that case, a person is going for some form of perfection when it's in a book form. And then there's also the guessing game of, as you were talking about, in terms of, how many copies of the book does one print? Because just as you're saying, the more you print, then the less it is per unit. But then you got to make sure you guess that number right. Because then if you get stuck with, a certain amount of inventory, that takes up, first of all, it's a lot of money to produce it. But then it's just a lot of bulk sitting there. If you have a whole pallet full of books in the garage, and you can't park in the garage because there's books in there that aren't selling, that in itself seems like that will just be a major source of frustration. For the zine, I since this is my first time doing this, I'm just trying to balance the pre-orders versus having some available after the fact, but not a lot. Because I do, if this is something that people do enjoy, I really do need them to pre-order so that I can figure out how many to order in. And
because even though the zines aren't taking as much space up in your office, in your garage, whatever, it's still something that you don't want to get stuck with at the end of the day. You don't want to order 1,000 copies of a zine and only sell 200.
Yeah. And then at some point, you're going to have a hard time covering your costs to even produce them in the first place.
Right.
And I think at this point I had, with the pre-orders plus the ones that I send to the people at certain tiers on my own Patreon, I'm around 250 or so. And so I ordered 350. So I give myself an extra 100, just in case, some get lost in the mail or whatever, are damaged in transit. And then on top of that, just to have them available after the fact. But, I don't want it to be such a huge number, such that, just as we're talking about, having a huge pile of something. But even if I did end up with a big pile of them and, they're not moving. It's much easier to recycle some zines as opposed to having a bunch of, hardbound books that are sitting there where at a certain point, what do you do with them? Because it's something that you can't just, you'd feel bad, moving them along somehow, but it's just much more logistically difficult to do so. So,
yeah.
So we'll see.
At least with a zine, you could kind of give it away in a sense. Like if you have a bunch of back stock with it, just send it off with a print, send it off with a portfolio box, whatever, like little surprises, your Patreon, that kind of thing. That's a little bit more.
That's a good idea. I actually hadn't thought about that, but that's a good idea. So, and it's just so much easier since they're so much lighter than a book to have that sort of surprise in there. And so that's something where I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. But I'm getting pretty close. Earlier today, before we were recording, I was designing the vellum sheets that I include in the portfolios, where there's one for each trip, which has the information on it in terms of the names of the photos and general settings, lenses and stuff. And then there's like a handwritten portion. And so I was doing the handwritten portion, scanning it in, then moving each word so that it like sits perfectly on a line, so it looks like I have legible handwriting, which I do, but I have to write it I write it big, and then I scan it, and then I kind of condense it, I guess you would say, just by moving all the words close to each other and fine tuning the placement so it fits the lines and fills the space well. But after that's done, I'll be able to start printing those. And so I've got all these plates that are spinning right now, but things are coming together well, and it's a fair amount of work, but I will say it's pretty enjoyable. Just like we talked in the past, it's when you're producing something physical like that, there's something that's very nice about that.
Yeah, it's once I see how yours turns out and everything, and talk a little bit more about that, it's gonna give me something to at least consider, because I do, even when I did the a morning walk and I did the physical print run of that as like a zine, the quality didn't turn out as great as what I wanted from it, and I think that was just like, it was poor printing on who I used side. But at the same time, it was still nice to see my own photographs in a physical manifestation like that. So I could definitely see having, even like you said, like a yearly thing where you produce that just as like a cheaper option than like actual folios or anything. I could definitely see that going and see that happening.
Do you remember how many pages it was when you made the one that didn't print out as well as you had hoped?
I want to say it was around 75, somewhere around there.
Okay, that's quite a bit. That's mine is 32 pages, and I think there was, I don't know if it was 18 pictures. It was something where it's a surprising. My struggle is usually trying to make sure I have enough images to fill the minimums of how small I can print it. With the binding style I'm doing, it's basically minimum of 30 pages, so I'm just barely squeaking by. And I have some spreads where there's one picture on one side, one picture on the other side, and where if need be I could give them their own separate pages. But I do like having that variety of, from one page to the next, things are different in the way that things are laid out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other nice thing too with it, is being able to have that smaller form factor where you don't have to worry so much about the logistics of everything.
Yeah,
I don't know, it's something to think about. It's just weird having that like little hang up, and I have these little hang ups with a lot of different things I'm noticing, especially around like photography and writing, where they're just preventing me from actually going through with something and actually deciding on what I want to do. Just like with this writing project. I mean,
How's that going?
I got so sucked in the past week on this Hugo site and playing around with that.
Oh yeah. That's been looking really good. The little preview that I've seen that you showed, it looked really good and really nice and clean.
It does, but at the same time, it's like there's such a heavy learning curve for me because I've never coded before. And yeah, this isn't like a ton of coding. It's mainly Markdown, but still getting it to the point where I want it to be. It's yesterday and today I kind of came to this like question in my head of what is more important to me, having a beautifully designed website right now that gives me all the features and everything that I need, or just getting off my ass and getting the work written and getting stuff out there. And I know which answer is right for me, obviously getting the work out there. Yeah. But at the same time, it's so difficult for me for one reason or another. And I don't know exactly why. Like I would be just fine, or pretty much fine, using Squarespace and as I currently have it alongside maybe Substack, or just using Squarespace and the footnotes be damned. But there's still that hang up of it's not as pretty, it's not as perfect as what I want it to be. And so I just keep pushing everything off. And then there are a bunch of other questions that are revolving around my head too when it comes to this stuff. So
yeah, that's a tough one because, where something like that, there are so many obstacles out there. And I can see how if you just started putting things out on Squarespace, and then at some point later down the line, once you're, comfortable with the new site design, then migrate things over there. You could start building up some of that audience. But I can definitely relate to, you can't really focus on doing B until A is done. It's like me, if I don't have like a perfectly clean desk, I can't think. I have to have like one thing out of the way so that I can work on something else.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see how that's a hang up where until the system is in place that allows you to produce what it is that you really want to, then it does make things a bit more difficult to kind of get into that creative space to begin with.
And what makes it so much more difficult yet too is even with Hugo, I know I won't be happy with it because there are a lot of minute details that I just can't alter, that I don't have the knowledge or the skills to change around. The simple fact that with Hugo, trying to display a gallery of photographs is really difficult to figure out. And there's really nobody on there doing it. Like Jeremy Bassetti doesn't have a gallery of his work on his website. Craig Mott doesn't have a gallery of his work on his website. So there's that difficulty there of like, okay, so even if I go this path, yes, it's going to be great for my writing, but at the same time, I'm losing something else. I'm losing the photography aspect of it and having to alter that. So if I were to really go full board with it, I would have to just learn to code myself and hopefully be able to figure out an option through learning to code. But that's a multi-year project of learning CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and possibly Ruby on Rails. And it's a whole...
Yeah.
That's something I should have started 2 decades ago.
Yeah. So how does how does Substack compare for stuff like this? I'm not too familiar with it, but I know that a lot of people use that for writing, but how does that compare?
Well, Substack would be for me just to host my writing. So it would just be, just my essays and everything. I'd have the navigation header, so that it points over to Substack instead of being on my website.
There's no images on Substack?
You can, yeah. You can put images on it through your, like a regular blog, just like you would in Squarespace. Yeah. But it's not an entire replacement for a website. It's more of just like a newsletter service with a few other little features here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think
it's one of those things where, I mean, since that's a road that goes down so much, I mean, in terms of like the programming stuff and all this and that, I think it's really just a matter of just setting that aside and taking that first step to at least get that creative process going, and at least to, work on whatever sort of structure it is that gets you in that right creative space. I don't know. I mean, I just think of all these things that these projects that where you feel like you need to be in that right, space for it. And so much of it is just a matter of forcing yourself to start it, even if things aren't quite perfectly set up.
Yeah.
And then through that chaos, somehow things kind of start taking form. But yeah, I have way back when I actually have a bit of a programming background. This was back in like when I was in college. So this is like the early 2000s. I did programming in Perl for like web stuff, and I don't even know if they still use that language. Maybe they do. And there was definitely a learning curve associated with stuff back then. It was fun to program stuff back then. I have not done that in a very long time, but I definitely know that rabbit hole in terms of learning how to do some of the stuff associated with the back-end web programming stuff and things along those lines. And it is something that takes a long time to create.
Yeah.
So I know that will definitely be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. It's all self-made torment for me. It's just like because the other thing that it's been going on in my mind too has been this idea of what my ideal life looks like. Yeah. And I've thought about, I bounce back and forth between the two of being a full-time artist and writing and photographing and being out in nature as much as possible, living like as much of like the idealized dream as possible with that. Mm-hmm. But on the other side of that, I also think of, well, wouldn't it be so much nicer in a sense to just find a job that I'm happy with and can be creative with, and like whether that's teaching or whatever, and just keep everything in the shadows and just put out my writing here and there where it's more of like, oh, Cody Schultz has something new, instead of like, oh, Cody has something new again today. Where that's like, and obviously that's a matter of building up the right kind of audience and everything. It can happen regardless, but still, where it's more of like, I don't put out articles every week, but every month or every quarter. And there are these long form, real deep, like long articles of delving into, like Craig Mod did this article. I want to say it's like 4,500 words, 3,000 words, something like that he sent out the other day on aloneness, not on solitude or on it, just like on the idea of being alone and feeling alone.
So how is that different from solitude?
Let me pull up what he actually says in here a minute, and I'll put a link down below too. But so he says, for many, being surrounded by big families or long-term partners is so normalized that to empathize with someone who is deep in aloneness, which I distinguish from solitude or quietude, more volitional and opted into states, is akin to imagining what it's like to fart your way to the moon. His wording for what he writes is so good.
Yeah.
But so essentially more of solitude and quietude being opted into states, whereas aloneness is forced or thrust upon you. But,
okay, I can see that. That is an interesting distinction, though, because it seems like in many cases it can take on a negative connotation, but as opposed to intentionally seeking it out and seeing it in a positive light.
Yeah, and obviously there's plenty too that can be discussed around that article alone. But for now, it's just, I read that article and just realizing that he had sat down and he had sat with these thoughts for months because he had mentioned them before in previous newsletters, previous articles and everything. But that he had sat with them for so long and waited for everything to kind of boil up to the surface before properly sitting down and writing something out in this long form manner. That just hits home with me so much harder than writing on a much more frequent basis. And so all of these thoughts that I keep going back to week after week and day after day just keep like tormenting me in this way, because I'm like, I want so badly to have my own website that is beautifully designed and that works really, really well. But at the same time, right now, I trying to get to that point is really difficult for me. And there's always going to be some kind of give and take there. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and also it's, when talking about, thinking about the ideal life, I mean, I can see how, I mean, it's got to be a difficult balance. And also, I think this is something that hasn't existed in the way that it is now for quite a while. I mean, like the fact that people can pursue something and make that their living. It hasn't always been that way. It hasn't always been the case to be able to do that. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but there's so many more choices now when it comes to something like, seeking that ideal life, even if that is the actual ideal life. Maybe it's what we think it is. But I can definitely see how if you were to have that mechanism in place where you can put stuff out there on your own terms at the quality level that you're satisfied with and a presentation that you are satisfied with, I can see how that would be a significant part of having that ideal life. With the nice place in the woods and things along those lines as well. Maybe not spandex. I don't know. Maybe that's just a me thing. But I don't know.
Yeah, swap the spandex out for some hiking boots and nice hiking pants or something. I don't know.
I just had a mental image of myself wearing spandex and hiking boots. It's kind of disturbing.
Seeing you in spandex is always disturbing, Ben. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, there's truth in that. I will say though, that kind of piggybacking onto something we were talking about last week in terms of the lack of the first day funk on the fall trip being possibly attributed to further interests. With all the work I have going on right now in terms of the portfolio to ship out, the zines and everything, I'm just thinking like at the end of that, if I can finish that, before say early December, my little reward at the end of that is to drive to Death Valley, not take my camera, just take my bike and go for some rides there on some open road and some other fun areas there. So I when it comes to the sort of ideal life scenario, for me, definitely there is a large spandex component involved in that. So yeah, but I do think that it is more possible now than ever to build that ideal life, though it certainly comes with a certain degree of compromise in terms of, not necessarily having a huge income, maybe giving up more time than otherwise, but, looking at like, my wife has a 9-to-5 type job, and it is kind of nice when a person can just be done with work for the day, go home, and then relax, and not always have to be on the clock. And that's something I think that factors in, though. For you and your writing, I don't know, maybe you would be able to turn that off a little bit in terms of, you're thinking about things, but not necessarily acting on them, all the time in terms of the writing and this and that. And also, if you have things set up in a way where it's not expected of you to, put out writings on a set schedule and this and that, or it's something where it's on your own terms, that would certainly be beneficial. But yeah, that's definitely, it's kind of the ultimate struggle, I think, where a lot of people would love to be able to do what they love for a living, but there's so much that goes along with that as well.
Yeah. Would love to be able to do what they love and what they're passionate about as a financial mechanism, but at the same time, realizing all of the stress and just all of the work that goes into making everything come to fruition. Yeah. Like all of the business knowledge that you have to have, or all of like because to really do it well, you have to, at least from what I've heard from other photographers these days who are making it, you have to be putting out work almost constantly, and you have to be having a large portfolio, and there's so much that goes into making it as a photographer and standing out from the rest of the crowd that it's really difficult. Like Yeah, and that's the biggest struggle for me is the idea of figuring out how to market myself and how to gain that awareness around my work while also staying true to it and not like burning myself out. Like I think of these weekly articles, and the more that I think about them, the closer to burnout I think that I am. And that's just thinking about them. That's not actually doing anything.
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of those deals of, do I really want to push out articles every week, even though that's going to help me to grow a lot faster. That'll help me to get to build up traction on everything. But at the same time, I'm sacrificing a lot. So that's all going through my head, and as I try to figure things out. And obviously not having a job to support everything right now is still a difficulty. But
has there been any changes on the job front? Any other potential opportunities or anything along those lines?
Not really. Trying to apply here and there to things, trying to figure out my resume and what I can all do with the degree that I have. I was looking at being a professor for community colleges since I have my master's, but it gets tricky there because my master's isn't technically in English. It's in secondary education with a certification in English. So in terms of teaching English at a college level, it can be tricky depending on what credentials they're looking for. The sister school that my girlfriend works at, where I actually went to school for middle school, they are hiring a middle school teacher for 7th grade, so I applied to that. But that was just this week, so we'll see what ends up happening with that. That's going to be another 2 weeks or so until I hear anything. So it's a slow slog, and I've got to contact some local recruiters, see if I can find anybody and see what they all say and what other jobs I can be looking out for and see where that goes. But
yeah. And in the meantime, if there are those that are listening that have been perhaps on the fence about maybe joining the Patreon, that would be much appreciated, because in lieu of, having that, that job security at the moment, I think it'd be a nice thing for Cody. So if anyone's listening right now and they're like, man, I've been thinking about it, but maybe not, it would definitely be very, very much appreciated. And I think that could ease things a little bit, and would also guarantee that there's more puppy talk, because everyone loves
that's true.
Puppy talk.
Puppy talk's always good.
Yeah. And another thing, actually, when you're talking earlier about, wanting to stand out from the crowd or needing to stand out from the crowd as a photographer, if you're going to make it, I think my solution for that through the years has always been to just be in a smaller crowd.
That's true.
Which it's easier to stand out that way. As a little bit of an example, inline skating is not as popular as cycling. And so there's this area that I've been cycling lately here in San Diego called Fiesta Island. It's a flat track of about 4 miles or so of uninterrupted pavement. So you just go in these loops, and it's kind of a fun test just to see how good you are. But when running the Strava app, you can see, how fast other people are. And it's pretty mind blowing how fast some of these people are with some of the bikes they're riding, and just how good of an athlete they are. And it's pretty insane. I was working my butt off, and I was averaging 22 miles an hour around the loop. But you see, the top records are 31 miles an hour. So these people are just incredible athletes. Now, that being said, the area where I go inline skating, I can use the app as well. And in all the years that people have been skating around that lake and running the app, I think there was 30 people, maybe something like that. And so I'm like, I'm going to get the best time on this one. So a little while back, I set out, and sure enough, I got the best time for anyone ever going around the lake that was running the Strava app. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. But then you look at it, it's like, all right, well, I did better than 30 people versus there's 10,000 people that have, gone around Fiesta Island. But there is something to be said about, being in a smaller crowd, and you can stand out a little bit more. but then somehow taking that and then adapting that to being in a bit of a larger crowd. So I don't know what that translates to, but that's just been one of my observations, especially by shooting film at a time when, film wasn't terribly popular, when it was kind of on its way out the door, and then kind of sticking with that for a long time. And that, I think if I was shooting digital the entire time, I don't think it really would have, I don't think I'd be doing this for a living. Let's put it that way. So I don't know how that translates, but there's something about being in that smaller crowd.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's food for thought.
Yeah, for sure. Any updates on the puppies or anything like that?
Not really anything notable. Emmie is still just a little terror most of the time.
Yeah.
And Lucy just had a vet appointment on, I want to say Tuesday, and the family took bets on how much she weighs at this point.
Yeah.
And I got the closest with 15 pounds as my guess.
Wow.
So she's 15.6 pounds right now. She's probably, as of today, she's probably closer to 16.
What did she start out as when you guys got her?
I think 3 pounds, 4 pounds.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, she's going to be, because she's the English Springer Spaniel, so she's going to be about 40 pounds, 45 pounds full grown. So she's still got a consistent amount of weight to put on. Whereas little Emmie she was about 3 pounds when we got her, and she is now a little over 6 pounds as of last week. So,
yeah,
talk about a major difference between the two. Like,
yeah,
that's that 9 pound difference in their same age. So,
yeah.
I mean, Emmie's only going to be about 12 pounds when she's fully grown, and she'll be just about fully grown in January or so when she hits 6 months. So,
yeah, that's a good size. I mean, we very much appreciate the size of Oliver. It makes it easier. Even stuff like when we're getting a doggy door for him, being able to get one that's a pretty compact setup just makes life pretty easy on that.
Yeah.
And so it's stuff. There's just a variety of things along those lines. But
I will say though that Emmie is quite the acrobat. I don't think I've posted much of anything on Instagram stories yet about it, but did I tell you about the couch and how she likes to maneuver around that?
No, I have not heard that.
So she likes to jump off the back of the couch because we don't have it up against a wall. And behind the couch is the little alcove where the steps are. And then it's the door to the closet where I'm in now. And we would typically block between the couch and a wall so that she couldn't get to the alcove and then down the steps and she couldn't escape. Yeah. Until she realized that she could jump up on the couch, crawl up to the top of the couch and jump off from there and then get downstairs. And then
she's like a cat.
Yeah, seriously. And then to make matters worse, so if she would do that, she would go down the stairs and she would jump over the baby gate that we have there that's supposed to prevent either of them from getting on the other side. Doesn't work too well with Emmie. And now we've changed things around a little bit, but now Emmie can scale the baby gate to get back upstairs.
Wow.
So not only can she jump over the baby gate to get downstairs, but she can scale it to get back upstairs when she's ready to. I'm like, this dog is, she is such a something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the most recent, I call it, whenever I text my girlfriend about something new that she's doing, I always say, yeah, Emmie's unlocked a new ability today. So.
Yeah. Yeah. With Oliver, we have him sleep in his crate. And he's fine with that, but he's like one of our cats where he would much rather crawl under the covers kind of at our feet and just like sleep down there. But sometimes in the middle of the night, he'll start whining a little bit, and it's hard to know whether he has to go to the bathroom or whether he's just trying to sneak into the bed.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I'll give in, I'll open the crate, And then he will just run on top of the bed and then dive under the covers as fast as he can. And then the moment I go in there and fish him out, he'll do this. It's a almost kind of a funny growl. Like he's trying to be like, hey, this, I don't want to go back in the crate, but it just comes across as kind of this whiny little growl. And then I'll put him back in the crate. But there's times when he'll, run to the doggy door, go outside and do his business. But I never really know with him, just because it could be one or the other. And I'd hate for him to, be in there like suffering. But most of the time it's just him trying to crawl under the covers. But we have a doggy door that reads his microchip. So it lets him out and it lets him in. So he can let himself out, which is good. And then our backyard is fenced in quite well. But yeah, that's been his new thing, where I never know which way it's going to go with him. And he's definitely manipulating us. So yeah.
Yeah. It's only going to be another 2 or 3 months, depending on how she is, but until she's in the bed fully with us again. Because once she's like fully potty trained, or as close as we're comfortable, is able to hold it through the night at least, she's fine in the bed with us. And that's ideally what we want anyway. But every morning, because I'm in charge of taking her out throughout the night, so that way my girlfriend can get the sleep that she needs and doesn't have to worry about it. So for work. Yeah. And typically if it's around like 5 o'clock or after 5 o'clock, she doesn't go back in her crate. She just sleeps in the bed with us.
Yeah.
And there are days where I'll sleep in till like 8:30 or so, and she's happily sleeping aside of me, doesn't get up, doesn't want anything to do with the rest of the world, just wants to sleep in the bed. So
yeah. See, Oliver just gets in the way. I mean, even though he's a little guy, he just gets in the way. And if I let him sleep in the bed at night, I wake up with a horrible night's sleep. So there's nothing wrong that he does. He's not a big dog, but he just is strategically in an area where I just can't stretch out or whatever. So there's nothing bad about him being in there, but it's just I just can't sleep. So that's the reason he's in the crate. But yeah, life with dogs. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.